Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lookout live stream. Today's the 27th, Saturday, and we're going into day 3 of the park fire burning near Chico, California. Started in Bidwell Park and is now threatening Manton. So we got some updated intel overnight from the National Fire Center. If you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Zeke Lunder. I work in Chico, California, and I'm a geographer, so I study wildfire, and I've been working on wildfires my whole career, basically since the mid-90s. Started off in working for the Forest Service in Susanville, California. I grew up in Westwood in Lassen County, so this geography where the fire's burning is kind of my home geography. I started a company in 2011 called Deer Creek Resources, named after Deer Creek, which runs right through the middle of this fire. So spent a lot of time in Deer Creek on foot, riding motorcycles, flying over in an airplane, my whole life, driving up and down Highway 32. So I'm going to tell some stories here about this country. We're going to look at what's happening. We're going to talk about the forests around here, forest conditions, things that we've been seeing here, I've been seeing here in my lifetime, and all to kind of create a context so we can understand what this looks like after the fire. The fire's doing some amazingly destructive things, moving in ways that a lot of us aren't yet used to seeing. And so when it's all over, we want to kind of understand what it means moving forward, how we can learn from this. So there's kind of the twofold purpose of this broadcast. One is to kind of give you all intel. I kind of, over my career, I've learned where to find this intel. This is all public source stuff. I'm not getting any kind of backdoor data feeds. This is all coming off the internet in places that you don't need a password to get to. So that's one, is just to share information. Two is to kind of provide education on forestry, fire behavior, and increase y'all's literacy of wildfire. Because for us to continue to live in places like Shingletown, Cohasset, Forest Ranch, Westwood, Chester, we all have to become fire experts, right? There's so much misinformation and kind of politicized messaging around wildfire and forestry that it's hard to kind of sort out what's real and what's kind of political, what's someone's agenda designed to divide us, right? So all of us have to become fire experts. So this is me kind of trying to share what I've learned in my career. I want to shout out to a lot of the people that have helped me learn all this stuff, whether it's Nick Bunch, who's the fire management officer on the Almanor district, or Robin Wills, who just retired from Lassen Park Park Service, Barry Kallenberger. A lot of people have told me stories. A lot of people have given me their time over the last 30 years. A lot of foresters, Russ Volke, Mike Marvier, Al Vasquez. And so when something like this happens, there's a lot of people, a lot of foresters who spent their whole career tending these forests, and I'm thinking a lot of them. We think of the people who are losing their homes, but the foresters, their home is the woods. And so every time we have a fire like this, the foresters are losing part of their heart. And so shout out to all the foresters who've worked in this landscape. And any critique I've got of the forestry, we try to put it in context, trying hard not to blame people for decisions that have really been made by society, economics and the big picture. So I want to talk about systems. I don't want to blame individuals. I think it's easy for us to do that, but we can critique systems that led to us getting here, and that's part of our mission too. So with that prologue, what I like about maps is that they kind of can be agenda free, right? The maps and the data show what's the real conditions on the ground, and that's what we need to be talking about, not about what someone told us they thought. Someone was saying they thought that the fact that we couldn't run bulldozers in Nashi Wilderness is the reason this fire got so big. Well, that's an uneducated, inflammatory statement as far as I'm concerned. Because let's always try to frame these things in reality. So the reality this morning is the fire is this area in red, out from down here around Bidwell Park, out to Highway 36 at Paynes Creek, and yesterday the fire ran up onto Inskip Hill over here. So the white line is yesterday afternoon or kind of midday perimeter from the National Fire Center, and red is where it was kind of early this morning from heat satellites and from the fire center. White line is so where you see bare red on the edge, that's new fire spread. White line means it hasn't moved in 12 hours, basically. So we're going to start here. There was a lot of concern last night about why is Paradise under advisory evacuation. And so looking at Highway 32, it looks like the fire has not spread over Highway 32 from Forest Ranch or Platte Mountain all the way down to Chico. So this is now held for over 24 hours, and that's a good long time. And it also didn't spread farther down Canyon in Chico, according to this mapping. I got to say that I don't know exactly the quality of the mapping. When a fire is this big, it can be hard to get the mapping. I've noticed that, and something easy happens, like the plane sensor goes down. These are complicated systems and they break. But as far as this mapping is telling us, no new spread down in Bidwell Park, no new spread along Highway 32, all the way up to Forest Ranch. And so as far as why they made that call to evacuate Paradise, that's a question for the public information officers with the teams. I'm not privy to what intel they had that made them feel like they needed an advisory. So running up Highway 32, there was minor spread up here, kind of pushing towards Forest Ranch Cemetery. And there's also minor spread up here by Platte Mountain Lookout, which is a little fire tower above the CAL FIRE station on Highway 32. So they fought this flank really hard yesterday with a ton of air tankers, and it's a fairly major miracle that Highway 32 has continued to hold. What we see is that the prevailing winds yesterday were really strong out of the south. North is at the top here, and the fires just run parallel to 32, which is just crazy remarkable that it hasn't run up these slopes and gone over 32. The winds are supposed to shift a little today and not be quite so out of the south, and so we're not out of the woods yet. There's all these places in kind of upper, so when you go up Highway 32 from Forest Ranch to Butte Meadows, you end up kind of running the ridge before you get to the Butte Meadows turnoff. There's been a ton of thinning done along here. You can see this little kind of light colored snake is ridgetop fuel brake that Sierra Pacific Industries has been working on for a long time. They've put a ton of work into these, and it's really kind of good luck for them right now that the fire has been blowing away from their line, because this line, with the fire behavior we've been having, if the wind had been blowing this way, it wouldn't have held. But this is sketchy for now because they've done a ton of retardant here. This is a difficult place with the terrain for them to get direct in there with dozers and crews. And so if we get winds that come more out of the west, this Highway 32 corridor is going to continue to be challenged really hard. And it's going to be a fight for them for several days if they're going to secure Highway 32. So the good thing is that the winds are lower this morning. The bad thing is that if we get any sort of changing winds that come more out of the west, 32 is going to be in play for some time here for them to be able to secure it. And what we saw during the Dixie Fire is what's going to happen now is the low pressure system that blew up everything yesterday is kind of moving through a bit, and we're getting some more stable air, and the fire's going to do what we kind of call packing in, where we're going to get a lot more smoke, and the fire may kind of slow down a lot. There's still going to be a ton of heat out here. This is burning in timber, down logs, and everything else, and so it can just kind of hang out and do not much for a week, and then if we get big strong winds, a week from now, we could lose Highway 32 and have fire pushing out into Upper Butte Creek, Butte Meadows, everything else. So this is kind of now goes into a slow motion. We've had a few days of explosive growth, and then if we get some stability here now we've got 300,000 acres, 500 square miles of fire on the ground, and a huge amount of perimeter to control. So what we saw during the Dixie Fire was that the fire burned Greenville, and then it took its time and it went all the way around Indian Valley over the course of like 2 weeks. And then it squirted out this way and it went all the way to Hurlong, right? So this is the kind of stuff that can happen when we, and that was almost the exact same time of year. Dixie made its big run through Chester on the 2nd of August. And so this time of the year, 3 years ago, Dixie kind of backed down to Humboldt Road here and didn't do anything for almost 5 days. And they did a bunch of firing operations, and then we got another weather front like we had yesterday, and the fire burned 200,000 acres. So that's all just to say that this is going to be a big fight for the coming days, and we can't really let our guard down. The fire may lay down with weather changes, and we're just starting. We're going into the end of July, beginning of August. We've got a lot of critical fire weather ahead of us. So the fact that they've held 32 all the way up to Forest Ranch, it's great. Every day that goes by that holds, the safer Paradise and Magalia are. But we could be in a situation where a week from now this fire wakes up and blows up into Butte Creek, and then we're worried about hooking back down later. So we have to kind of be patient. Watch. They're not going to call any of this contained for a long time because they don't want to. They're not going to be ready to walk away from this for a long time, even though it right now has been really good. Okay, so and I'll answer some questions later. So we've got the Butte Meadows turnoff here, Humboldt Road, and then as we go up here, we've got the H line. And the H line is the major road that people took to evacuate from the top of Cohasset. And there's been a huge amount of fuel break thinning done on the H line also over the last 25 years. And you can kind of see that when you come in here and look at the imagery. All this, pretty much the entire H line since 1999 has been thinned heavily because they're worried about a fire coming out of Deer Creek. So, huge amount of forestry thinning. The fire's already through all this, so this part of it didn't pan out. But if you keep going up the H line, here, this thinning continues. It's kind of a patchwork of clear cuts, ridgetop fuel breaks, and it goes all the way up to Highway 32, and it also continues all the way up to Transfer, which is kind of where the Boy Scout Road drops off of Highway 32 and goes back to Butte Meadows. So you've got this network of heavy thinning along ridgetop roads, and if they get a weather opportunity, there may be a chance for them to fire some of this, but the problem is that the fire is already pretty much established across into Chico Creek. So the H line kind of runs the divide between Chico Creek and Deer Creek, north of Cohasset, and the fires will establish here into like Big Smoky Creek, Big Smoky. So this is Chico Creek in the bottom here, and this is going to be really tough for them. There's not a great strategy. They can try to fire the H line here and hold it at 32, but the fire's already flanked them around the top, going up towards, this is Sugarloaf. So a lot of fire out in here, and we're really at the mercy of the winds. Not a lot of opportunity to go direct because of the heaviness of the fuels and the brokenness of the topography. So just for orientation, this is Windy Cut Lookout when you drop into Highway 32 into Deer Creek, and this is the K line up here, which if you go camping in Upper Deer Creek, drops down and crosses Deer Creek down here at the K line bridge. So a lot of thinning's been happening up here. SPI has been really active in doing ridgetop thinnings in this country. The problem is just that there's spot fires out here, and the fire's already kind of advanced into a lot of places that, like, we could, if the fire was just out here, we could fire the K line and fire these ridge lines north of Polk Springs and keep the fire on this side, but it's on both sides of the divide now, and so it's pretty tough. This is a tough corner of the fire for them. You know, they can try to hold it on Highway 32, and that's kind of the only real connecting the dots line through here. And the problem with that is just that Highway 32 through a lot of this is mid-slope, and so you've got these kind of fingers of tributaries to Deer Creek where the fire gets established in here, and it's going to want to run up here and push at 32. And so just tactically, there's not much thinning along 32 between what we call transfer, the passing lane, where you drop in, and the K line. There's been a lot of thinning farther down here, but it's just the terrain and position of the fire are going to make holding 32 really difficult. Someone wants me to up my volume. It's up as high as it can go, so you might just have to crank up. All right, see Carol Mapleson over here. Agenda 21 and Lockstep. If you make comments about Agenda 21 on my channel, you're going to get blocked because we don't do conspiracy theories. Okay. Anyway, tough ground. Long odds of this being successful, likely to play out over quite a while. Going across the top here, then we've got just back out here real quick and do a little geography lesson. Okay, so to wrap up the east side of the fire, looking pretty secure up Highway 32 to Forest Ranch. Forest Ranch is looking really pretty good, all in all. Amazing amount of work, and what happens on fires like this is you got to concentrate your resources in the places where they're going to be effective. And so this flank, being kind of the downwind flank, has been the place they could hit harder retardant, good access on 32, amazing save. Nice job, CAL FIRE. Cohasset looks to be all burned. I saw an encouraging picture in today on Instagram that Ron Ward's Maple Creek Ranch survived in Cohasset. That's a place that has been kind of the nexus of prescribed fire training in Butte County. We've done a ton of burning on Ron's, and if you check out the Lookout YouTube and check out landowner burning in Cohasset, Ron's done a ton of work up there, and we've done a ton of burning. And a friend who works for the NRCS was at Ron's yesterday and said that she thinks that the thinning and burning we did there might have saved a lot of what did not get destroyed in Cohasset. Okay, so we've got Cohasset Road here running up through the middle. It forks and goes to become the H line here, and Ponderosa Way at the helipad. And then as you go north, Ponderosa Way it crosses Deer Creek at the north end of Issue Wilderness, or the east end, and then it climbs out and it drops back down into Mill Creek at Black Rock. And then it goes up into Antelope Creek, climbing out of Mill Creek, crosses all the forks of Antelope Creek, and winds up on Giant Mill Road up by Paynes Creek. And then this is the Hogsback Road. So we've been talking for a couple of days now about how Ponderosa Way might get used to hold up the fire here. Likely not going to happen here on Deer Creek. It's already over it, right? It's already up to the divide on Ponderosa Way between Deer and Mill Creek, OB Field Spring, I think. And so long odds that they would actually be able to stop it here on Ponderosa Way, given the alignment and access and danger and just gnarliness of what the fire's been doing. But as of last night, it had not got to Black Rock, but it had blown out of Mill Creek and crossed up by the Boondocks, which is kind of a Panther Spring, and the Boondocks is this area out here that has a bunch of kind of summer cabins and trailers and stuff. A lot of thinning's been done out there, but the fire hit it really hard, so we don't really know yet what's going on there. Here's South Fork of Antelope Creek, and there's been some prescribed fire and thinning done there. And so there's kind of, if the fire lays down, there's this hopeful alignment of where the fire was last night, that they might be able to come and actually fire a bunch of this kind of Antelope Creek chunk inside of Ponderosa Way. They still might get it from the fire that's already established in Antelope Creek down here, but it's not out of the question that they'll be able to pick up parts of Ponderosa Way if it cooperates. So now we've gone across Ponderosa Way. We're at kind of Giant Mill Road. Heard that Ponderosa Sky Ranch last night, there was a lot of structure protection, firing operations. I can never find Ponderosa Sky Ranch, but it's up here off of Highway 36 here. Ponderosa Sky Ranch, as far as I heard last night, no structures have been lost there, and they've done a bunch of firing around it. And what I heard this morning was that the fire had kind of hung up on a 2-track road pushing up towards Manton. It hadn't gotten to Manton. Here's Highway 36, fire crossed yesterday afternoon. Fire also burned to the top of Inskip Hill last night. And we've got some video of that here, I think. Let's touch compute. So many webcams. Inskip Hill. It's a little jerky when this first loads, but this is the fire burning up to Inskip Hill and burning all around. Okay. It's burning all around the webcams, and then what I think is interesting is in the morning here is you can see that all the trees aren't dead there. So I think that's worth mentioning. This fire is really insane, but at the head, but there's the flanks too, and that not everything out here is going to be black after this fire. There's going to be a lot of trees that survive. There's a lot of different heads on this fire, and heads are all burning really hot, but then there's a lot of, for all these heads, there's also a lot of flank. And if you look at how fire spreads in a place like this, you know, we're all worried about the wildlife, and there's definitely going to be a lot of carnage, but there's also this patchiness to the fire, and animals oftentimes can kind of find the black, and they've survived for years with fire. So that was Inskip Hill burning right here. So this mapping we have isn't completely up to date because the fire is now up on Inskip Hill. What you can see, this line running right through the middle here, is the power lines that go through Chico. I'm talking about the Inskip Hill by Manton. These power lines run right through the middle of, don't do that. These power lines run right through the middle of the fire. Basically, you can see them run all the way down through here. All the way down. This fire started right below the power lines in Bidwell Park. So this corridor, they've done a lot of thinning work on the power lines over the years. But power lines are still impacted. They still have to inspect the power lines before they can turn them back on. These power lines are a big deal. They're 500 kilovolt, huge amount. They're huge lines, and they run from California. They run all the way from Orville, from the substation at Table Mountain, all the way up by Bernie, up through Klamath, up by Klamath Falls, all the way up to the Columbia River. And then up here they tie into like Bonneville Dam. So you got these huge hydroelectric power plants on the Columbia River that are a big part of the generation of the entire West Coast electrical. And so that 500 kV line is the intertie, Western Area Power Administration, between the Columbia River and the California grid. So California's got a lot of new generation from renewables, and that's going to help right now because right now we don't have any access through those lines to all the hydropower in the Pacific Northwest. So fires affect things at all kinds of scales. So working our way around anyway, keeping on trucking here. Don't know much about what's going on, but you can see that from the white line yesterday to the red line this morning, there's a lot of spread out here in the kind of wildlands, inaccessible, lower Antelope Creek, down here at the mouth of Mill Creek. Here's where Mill Creek comes out to Los Molinos. So they've been using helicopters down here, and they've really buttoned up. A lot of this was open yesterday. They've really buttoned up, and a lot of this fire that's backing down the valley is good fire ecologically, burning in places that were going to be hard to get burnt with prescribed fire. So huge impact of this is grazing lands for the winter range, but after we get some rain, this land is going to green up really beautifully. So short-term losses for ranchers, long-term benefits for range productivity, potentially reducing star thistle. So a lot of this front country not destroyed by fire. So that's kind of going around the horn. This whole valley edge, this is going to continue to burn down towards the valley likely. I don't see any big east winds or north winds in the forecast, which is good as far as this threatening the valley. And also when you get down here to where people live, we've got a lot of irrigated pasture, we've got a lot of orchards, and low population density. So not as worried about a huge movement of the fire coming down and say taking out Red Bluff. So the big threats right now are Manton and Shingletown. Now we've just had we've had 3 days of exceptional winds and dryness, and the fire behavior has been explosive. And so I did something last night, and some of you probably have seen it on Facebook and elsewhere. And this isn't really designed to scare anyone. It's just to kind of build our awareness of the situation, right? Fires burned 40 miles in 3 days. It's 40 miles. So I just took kind of the center of the heat here at the head and buffered it, but 10-mile buffers to get back to 40 miles to where we started. So if you go 40 miles ahead of where the fire started, you get to Bernie, you get to Shasta Lake. And this is not a prediction, right? This is not me saying that I think that in 3 days the fire is going to be at Bernie. This is just saying that what we do in fire behavior is a very inexact science. And a real kind of rule of thumb for the young firefighter is if the fire ran 5 miles yesterday and the conditions today are the exact same and the fuel type hasn't changed, don't be surprised if the fire runs 5 miles today. The big if here is the weather, and the weather is changing. So good likelihood the fire is going to slow down a lot. But I just wanted to throw this up there just to show that if we had another 3 days of the exact same weather, this fire would get to Bernie or get to Montgomery Creek. Not only because the fuels are the same, but along the way, you've got alignments in the topography that have supported huge fires in the past. So the Fountain Fire, 1992, this fire burned, I always remember it's 92 because this fire burned the first week that I moved to Chico to go to college. And mineral's still okay. So this fire at the time was kind of our mega fire, our first big mega fire. And it ran from here to Bernie. It ran most in 1 day. And that burned 60,000 acres. And so it's been 32 years since that burned, and this has all been kind of replanted in thick plantations. They salvage logged it. They planted a ton of trees that are super thick now. It's hot, it's dry, it's exposed to southwest winds, it's got topographic kind of funneling. And so this will likely, in the near future, next 10 years, I've been waiting my whole career for this thing to burn again. And so when I saw that it was, in line, like if you just draw an arrow along the shape of this fire, that shows you your prevailing wind direction. So if we just draw a line here from from Chico to the head of the fire. That kind of gives you the, like, if the fire kept burning under the same conditions, this is where it would be headed. It'd be headed to Montgomery Creek. So that just caught my attention. So like I said, I'm not a meteorologist and I don't have a very good kind of crystal ball for the weather. This is just to say that if the weather stayed the same for the next 3 days, it wouldn't be really outside the realm of possibility that it would get to Round Mountain, Montgomery Creek, and blow up in the next mountain fire. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think in the next 3 days, but that's just, it's some real basic fire behavior. Just we like to visualize. I'm a visual thinker. I've learned a lot of what I've learned by working with maps and exploring maps and looking at things at scale, and that's how I think. So it's just me sharing kind of some noodling. Another thing that's worth talking about here is the Ponderosa fire. This Ponderosa fire, we talked about it a little yesterday. It burned in 2012, and it did most of this run in 1 day. And so that's another kind of place where the landscape expresses to you the potential. So you see that this fuel type here is exactly the same as this was, but maybe a little heavier because it's been 12 years since this burned. So any of this land out here, if the wind is blowing up the hill, has that potential for a 20,000 or 25,000 acre run in an afternoon. So I am worried about this chunk out here, even without a lot of winds. You've got this kind of topographic funneling here where if we have a kind of westerly wind, it's going to be able to blow right up here through the South Fork of Antelope Creek and take out this whole kind of, the fuels are there for it to have a major run to the east. So we talked a little yesterday and on Twitter, I think, about what the fuel loading's like in this burn. There's been a lot of mastication and thinning in the trees that got planted, and there's a wildfire here May last year that burned into here and kind of just went out. Like this fire here, they're able to there's a fire here last year. Once they got into the plantation, they controlled it quickly. So plantation's great dozer ground. If the fire, if we don't have crazy winds pushing this thing next couple days, there's good odds that this change in fuel type is going to help pick up this edge of the fire. Right now, this edge of the fire is not uncatchable if it lays down. It was uncatchable yesterday because it was pushing so hard with the weather and the fuels. But right now, with good weather, there's pretty good odds that they could catch this end of the fire. This stuff out in here, in timber, gonna be a lot harder. But kind of best case scenario I could see right now is they might be able to really, if they get the weather, pound the heck out of this end of it. I'm still worried that this fire here is gonna burn potentially all the way up to the Dixie Fire. Dixie Fire is in blue here. Just because of the fuels, topography, the access, and the weather, and the fact that it's well established in difficult ground. So best case scenario I could see right now is we hook it up here, we somehow can keep it out of mineral, and we lose this chunk here. That's what I think is likely. We might get lucky and pick up a lot of it, but the other best case scenario, hold it at Highway 32 and figure out how to deal with the stuff that's already established in Chico Creek. One good outcome here would be if the fire does run this way and backs down into Deer Creek and Mill Creek. This land up here on Upper Mill Creek hasn't burned for a long time, and it's got some incredibly beautiful, lush, moist, old growth Doug fir forest. It's kind of the Big Bend area. It's super inaccessible, never been logged down in the bottom. So I'm hopeful that even if we burn up this ridge top, if we can get fire that backs down into Mill Creek instead of blasting up out of there, we might still have some old growth in there. Deer Creek burned in 1990 or 2008. This area here in green. So talking about Deer Creek, here's our Windy Cut lookout. Here's the red bridge when you first get to Deer Creek on Highway 32. And everything from there up to Elam Campground burned on both sides in 2008. Lightning started ridgetop fires. They burned down on either side. And when you drive 32, you can hardly tell that ever happened. So this is due for another fire. It didn't get it during Dixie. And so we might get some beneficial fire in Deer Creek if it doesn't just go blasting through this way. But that rarely happens. Usually fire wants to run up the slope and out rather than, like, we rarely see a fire that's just going to blast up Deer Creek Canyon. It's going to more likely blast up here and back down, blast up, back down, blast up. This whole side burned and had mixed mortality, but this is all roadless in here, Cub Creek roadless area, and we don't really have a lot of management options in here generally. So it's not necessarily the end of the world for Deer Creek to burn again. It's due. It's just hopefully it happens under these inversions and not on the days like yesterday. Someone's asking about past fires in Deer Creek. And the answer is yes. Right, this is the fire history layer. There's places out here in the front country, Deer Creek, that have burned 7 times since we started keeping records. And this is kind of an impossible map to read, but it does give you an idea of, you've got like the 2013 Deer Fire, and you've got the 1990 Campbell Fire. You've got the 1999 Gun 2 fire that burned down towards the valley with a north wind. You've got the 2013 Panther Fire, 2008 Cub Fire. And you've got these older fires that burned in like 28, 17, 99, 90, 2018. Right, so the landscape out there is a real patchwork based on this convoluted fire history. A lot of what's burning in Ecological Reserve area and down in the canyon below Chico burned 25 years ago. All right, so I was going to pull up a little bit of intel here. We've got, how's everyone doing out there? So far, so good. Not a ton of structures because this is burning through some rugged, fairly uninhabited land, but definitely these threats. Shingletown is a huge threat. Luckily, there's not a lot of other huge fires burning in California right now. We've got access to a ton of resources. Thanks for all your chat over there. People are going off, and if you guys can answer each other's questions as much as possible. I can't really think and drive the computer and answer questions all at the same time. Okay, fire weather forecast. Let's blow this up a little bit. All right. I'm going to read it out loud. Marine air moved northward up the Sac Valley from Bay Area and Delta last night. This will bring unseasonably cool and moist day to the fire area, but unfortunately it'll be short-lived. Winds will continue to be out of the south, but run about 5 miles less than yesterday, Friday. Instability will still be high, and some afternoon cumulus is possible, but no showers or thunderstorms are expected. Temperatures are going to increase starting tomorrow, but RH values will remain steadier, with minimum values being closer to normal, 25% versus say 15. And we're getting more recovery at night, and that's really important because the nighttime, when the humidity's up, that's when we really can put fires out, when we can go direct, when the fire's not spotting a while. So weather today, we're kind of worried about above 3,000 feet, so 77 to 82, and the minimum RH up there is going to be 33 to 38%. So that's almost like if the fuel wasn't so dry, those are good kind of weather conditions for prescribed fire. 20-foot winds, south to southwest, 8 to 12, gusts to 25. So that's the problem, is you get those gusts and you get the long range spotting. Very unstable, high ventilation rates. So that's why the fire's been blowing up, is we had this incredible kind of low pressure. So think of the atmosphere as being something that the weight of it changes depending on how much air is, when you have higher pressure, you got more air kind of packed in, and the air weighs something. It's pushing down on you. So we got high pressure, the atmosphere weighs more, and it's weighing down on the earth and keeping things from bubbling up. Low pressure means, you let your helium balloon go on a high pressure day and it doesn't rise as fast. Low pressure, unstable day, the balloon rises faster. So that low pressure, high instability is what allows the fire to punch up into the stratosphere and turn into a frickin' volcano. So low pressure is a bad deal for fire blowing up, but it's good, it's cooler and moister. Tonight, RH coming up 50 to 60%. Still a little windy, but and we got west winds tonight. So the west winds are a bad deal for Highway 32. West winds are a good deal for Inskip or not Inskip, but Manton, Shingletown. So a fire this big, there's winners and losers depending on the weather. Some people are going to be stoked there's a west wind. Some people are not going to be stoked there's a west wind. It's generally clear skies and an increase in temp each day, Monday through Wednesday. A little more stable each day. Stability's good. Okay, and then fire behavior forecast. This is kind of, they take the weather and they apply it to the vegetation. And so a lot of grass out there. Fuels are extremely dry, the dead fuels. There's a lot of dead and down fuels, challenging terrain. The active burn period is shorter because it's not as hot and it's cooling off sooner. So in the Butte zone, let's look real quick at an operations map so we can make sense of what they're saying here. So let's look at branch 5 and branch 20 and 25. There's my map here. See if I can load up a map here. While we're at it, I wanted to talk a little bit about Chester and the Dixie Fire. So I had a email from a friend who rents boats at Almanor saying, hey, should I pack my boats up? I said, no, you're fine. I still totally think Chester Lake Almanor's fine. And let me explain why. I'm just loading up another map here. This map here shows, This map here shows the salvage logging around Chester following the Dixie Fire. And this is what it looks like in a lot of salvage logged areas, but with fewer, they've taken away the trees. But you've got this kind of really a lot of bare soil, some real sparse grass, some mullein, and little baby ceanothus, but very low fuel loading. The logging that happened after the Dixie Fire was all whole tree harvest and whole tree yarding. So they cut down a tree, they pull the whole tree, branches and all, the landing, and they delimit there at the landing. So all the branches, for the most part, come with the tree. And because the goal of this logging was to prep for salvage or for replanting, they did a really, really tidy job of cleaning up the slash. So when you look at all around Chester and Lake Almanor in the Dixie Fire footprint, all of this got enormously scraped off, right? So wrapping all around Chester and the north end of Dixie, it looks like this, and it's not going to carry crazy fast explosive fire behavior. And that effect of Dixie it covers a huge portion of the landscape, right? Including down here, if it burns, this is Deer Creek down here in Mill Creek. All this red are places that burned extremely hot in Dixie and have almost no fuel loading. I've been hiking around up in the park. Like there's grass, and the grass might kind of flames. There's places the flames are going to go through the grass, but as you get higher, there's less and less grass, and there's just this massively changed amount of fuel on the landscape here. And so that wraps, like, the fire could totally blow out and roast incredibly hot through Mill Creek and Deer Creek, and it still wouldn't get into Chester because of this reduced fuel loading. Another thing we can look at here is this other way that you crunch the satellite data, which is called NDVI. And that is looking at vegetation density. And so as you see around Chester, there's no vegetation. All this is, and in the Dixie Fire in general, you can just see, like, here's the unburned area, which has just got incredible amounts of biomass. And then Dixie is got hugely removed. So, I mean, it's striking. You look at the landscape and you see, like, the Bear Fire and the Camp Fire and the Dixie Fire, and it's huge change and huge loss in forests. Like, if you go back 6 years, this is all solid green. Anyway, that's just to say that when we put our fire on here, here's mineral. This is a huge 1,000,000-acre fuel break, basically, and everything over here is pretty much fine. Greenville, Westwood, Chester, Old Station, all this stuff. Fires. We might have some places fire gets through on some grass. It's not going to take out any of these towns. So what we're worried about is places like Mineral, where it hasn't burned for a long time, and a ton of fuel. Someone's asking about severity, burn severity. Well, we're going to have some of that. This satellite goes over every 5 days, and it's due to go over today at noon. Anyway, we talked a little about the clear cuts and how fire behavior increases in these open stands just because of how dry they are. This is a kind of, so if we're looking at Antelope Creek down here where we're worried about the fire blowing out, fire's down in here right now, and you've got heavy fuel of the old forest that hasn't been logged mixed with these really dry patches of young stands. So we're going to look at the, here we go. I want to look at the operations map here for today. And it's hard for the folks making the maps to keep up with a fire that's burning 300,000 acres a day. So this perimeter is a little old, but it'll give us an idea of what, when they're talking about the different branches. So I'm gonna zoom in here. So, come back to our fire behavior stuff. They were talking about branches. So we got up here, branch 15 is Antelope Creek. And branch 20 is kind of Highway 32. And branch 25 is like Paradise. And then in the Tehama zone, it looks like there's not a branch there. But branch 10 is the front country. So let's go back to our fire behavior forecast. Okay, branch 5. Still didn't see where that was. But branch Highway 32 and Fire is well established in Big Chico Creek and will continue to challenge control lines with slope runs and spotting. Steep, rocky, and inaccessible terrain in Big Chico Creek and Butte Creek will complicate the establishment of control lines. Branch 5 is the front country here, I think. Grass is high load, very flammable, and rapid fire growth. Risk of spots and slop overs. Lava rock will slow efforts, making it more difficult. And then branch 15 is Antelope Creek. Multiple drainages in this branch align with the expected afternoon winds, leading to extreme fire behavior with critical rates of spread and significant spotting. Fire will continue to move east to northeast. Plan for and anticipate spotting. So just to kind of revisit that in 3D. Turn off the fires. Turn on the fire. So what they're saying here, and it's what we talked about, is that if we get west winds, there's open line above Forest Range by the cemetery and up towards Platte Mountain, where we can get slope-driven runs. They've painted so much with retardant that'll help, but like farther up here, like around Butte Meadows, turnoff, where you've got Chico Creek running up, like when you pass Butte Meadows turnoff and you drop in to Chico Creek, it's just the road's not a good alignment to hold the fire, and so there's a lot of fuel break that's been done up here this is the road to Butte Meadows, and there's been a lot of thinning there. So ideally, if they get the weather, they would want to fire this, and that would start to create a buffer, because otherwise the fire comes up. If you fire it, you have some control over when this happens. Otherwise, it might hang out up in here for a day and then get a west wind and blow out of here, and spot all over down here below Butte Meadows into the West Fork of Butte Creek, or into Butte Creek proper. So it's complicated, but what we saw during Dixie, which is cautionary, is that we had big firing operations. We had exact same timing. Dixie blew up like crazy. Last week in July, it laid down. We went from this extended period of really explosive fire weather, into a week of high stability, and this is super difficult. And so let's just kind of take the story of Humboldt Road during the Dixie Fire and bring it back to here. So I'm gonna just switch the camera here to something else for a second so I can find some data, but I think there's a good story to tell here. What are we talking about? We're talking about let's look at infrared mapping from Dixie Fire from the 24th. Can I do this? I've got a big archive from Dixie, but it's can't say it's super well organized. Here we go. Here we go. All right, this is stuff I love. We're moving kind of out of talking about purely the campfire and more into this is a really interesting story, and it has a lot to do with the psychology of the firefighting at this point in time. All right, so let's look at let's look at our fires here. Blue is where the Dixie Fire ended up being. Let's turn off our 10-mile rings. Okay, so blue is final million acres of Dixie Fire. Yellow is where the Dixie Fire was almost exactly 3 years ago, on the 29th of July. So Dixie started down in the Feather River Canyon, and this red is the perimeter of Dixie at that time. So Dixie Fire started in here, it ran, it was already kind of cooled off. This is like 2 weeks into the fire. Yellow is all scattered heat. So the fire blew up like crazy, and then it laid down for like a week. And so during that time, CAL FIRE prepped, and they fired Humboldt Road all the way from Jonesville over Humboldt Summit. Here's Humboldt Road here, all the way up to Lake Almanor and around and to Canyon Dam. So like 30 miles of firing got done on Dixie in this period, this week where the fire really laid down. It even like almost rained a little bit. So they had these new drones that could drop fireballs, and they had hand crews, and they lit this entire edge of the fire. And it didn't really burn very well. Like down in here in the bottoms, it had all been thinned a lot. This is white fir. And they didn't really get a lot of depth on their firing. So you can see they did this firing operation, and they got not much depth off the road, and they used drones, and they came in here. And the whole idea here was like, okay, we got an opportunity out in front of the fire. This is our only tactical opportunity to rope in this whole side of the fire. And this is the fire itself, this was kind of the leading edge of the fire as it barely moved for like 5 days. So put all this fire on the ground, and that's the 29th. And let's see if we can open up maybe the 30th. Evening of the 30th. All right, so here's the 30th. Got a little more depth here. Got some intense heat. They're using the drone to kind of try to gain depth on this thing. So let's look at maybe the 1st. All right, got some more depth here. So when we're talking about large-scale firing operations, what was new about this fire was that they had drones, and they could put a ton of fire on the ground. Okay, that's the 1st of August. So let's look at the 2nd August. Oh my gosh, reliving. This was such a crazy, crazy time. All right, so by 2nd of August, they'd gotten depth. All of this was kind of fired. The stuff they'd put on the ground had grown in. They still had some open stuff here, but they had lit all of this. This was all heat that was created basically by the firing operations, 30 miles. And at this point, I drove through. On the 30th, I drove through with the IC, and we checked it out, and we didn't, it wasn't doing anything. It was just kind of like the fire was out along the edge. It was really smoky. It was super still. It was cool. And they thought, well, maybe we hooked it. Maybe we hooked it. Maybe we're going to get to go home. Maybe the fire was at this point, it was a big fire, but it wasn't a mega fire. And there was this feeling of maybe we had hooked it. And then on the 3rd, midday, let's just look at where it was. Here. one of the interesting things about Dixie was that it was the first time that we had like real-time IR flying multiple times a day. Uh-oh. This is the 3rd of August. And what happened? Inversion lifted. Things are still critically dry. And all this backing fire that had been put down in a really controlled fashion under good conditions for burning suddenly is over the mountain and going up Butt Mountain and headed for Lake Almanor West. All right. So what happened on the 4th? Oh no. Oh no. What happened on the 5th? Dang. Yikes. And what happened on the, say, by the 7th? Didn't load. Well, in that time also Greenville burned. We had this crazy weather event, and don't know why that last one didn't load, but like I said, Dixie kind of broke our mapping systems. It broke our firefighters, it broke our foresters. By the 8th, the fire was pushing A21, right? Like, so a week after, 5 days after it crossed Humboldt Road, it had burned like an extra 150,000 acres. In the meantime, it had also burned up to the top of Katy Ridge and all the way around the north arm into the Moonlight Fire. So this is important. This is really important because this is when we realized that all of our tools we have for managing big fires were no longer working. And this scarred deeply the people that made the calls, right? And it scarred deeply, Collins Pine. Collins Pine lost 50,000 acres of their land in 2 days. Collins Pine's actually suing PG&E right now because of that, saying that PG&E started this fire and that it caused a massive disruption to their operations, the sustainability of their operations, right? And so what we ended up with was the Dixie. And a lot of people say, well, what would the Dixie look like if we hadn't done anything? If we hadn't fired this and the fire was hung up here and we didn't advance it several miles with our firing operation, would that wind event have done the same thing? Probably would have, right? It's really hard to tease this stuff apart in the back. And the whole thing that firefighters are operating under is the idea that we have to do something. We had to try something. We couldn't not try something. And so it's hard forensically to tease this apart and say, like, hey, if they hadn't done this firing operation, Collins Pine wouldn't have lost their land. But you can't really do that. We see that there were conditions for the fire to spread 20 miles. And so did moving the fire forward 2 miles change that? Or would we still have had the same losses? But what I want to say just is that when we come back and talk about our options here for how we may box in this difficult terrain, in the past we would have thought, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to fire Highway 32 and we're going to drag fire up through these fuel breaks up to Butte Meadows, and we're going to box this whole thing in with a firing operation. And a lot of the same folks that made those calls during Dixie are still players in the operations of this fire. And they're scarred. They see that firing doesn't work when you've got extreme conditions. And if you put a ton of fire on the ground when you have a window, even if it's a week long, they've seen now the potential in the fuels and the landscape for explosive fire behavior. And they know that, hey, we could put fire on the ground here and there's a chance we'll hold it. There's a good chance we'll hold it. But there's also a chance that we're going to get a Dixie Fire type wind event that's going to burn down Butte Meadows and going to burn down everything here that hasn't burned in Dixie. And so it's a huge burden to put on the ops folks, to have them be the ones that make the call and say, we're going to fire 32 up Humboldt Road to Butte Meadows. But tactically, that's one of their only options for getting ahead of this thing before, it might lay down here for a week, and like we said, then you might get a weather event that blows it over Highway 32. So the question is that same weather event going to blow up your firing operation and spread your firing operation into the community? So, like I said before, the problem here is that we socially are responsible for the problem as a society, for deciding that we were going to let folks manage timberland purely based on economic considerations and maximizing yield, and building formulas of how we decide, in which we decide that this is the best way to manage forest land, and that economics should drive the bus, right? So then, all together, our universities that we pay for, our public universities that we all support, have cranked out generations of foresters that have decided that this is the way that you should manage timberland. So we're all on the hook for that. This is our public, like it or not, this is how we've decided that timberland's going to get managed. But now some poor ops chief has got to personally put himself on the hook, or put his team's reputation on the hook, to implement a high-risk strategy to win a very difficult battle. So when I said yesterday, try not to blame people, that's what I'm talking about. It's difficult. I want to blame University of California or the State Board of Forestry, but that's all of us. Anyway, this will be very interesting, and I think there's still a million lessons to learn from Dixie, and all this data that we can take from the Dixie Fire to understand these decisions, their consequences, try to understand the mindset of the folks that have to make these calls. Drum Yogi says Plumas County wasn't allowed to cut timber because of the state. Well, I don't know about that. Like I said, maps tell the story, right? And this is Plumas County. And if we go back a little in our magic time machine here, let's go back to 2019, before the Dixie Fire. Plumas County looks to me like there was quite a bit of timber cutting happening in Plumas County back there. Yep, Plumas County, Stone Plumas County. This Plumas County down here. Like the Plumas National Forest definitely fell behind on their timber cutting program, but this is Plumas County. So there you go. All right. Well, people, if you want to debate the politics of forestry in the comments, feel free. But we do prefer factual debate. And I also like real names, if you want to comment on my stuff. It's nice to see people over there that exist and aren't just a handle. Because, I don't know, who's Mr. Thermistor? I got one other thing to say, and this is just kind of silly. But it's a story, right? Here's where the fire started. Alligator Hole parking lot. Check out, dang, got the layers going here. Let's just turn off our red here. See this area here that's all star thistle? We wrote a burn plan. So we've been burning in the park. You know, down here you can see the burn we did this year with the city. The company I work for, Deer Creek Resources, we wrote burn plans for the park to deal with star thistle and fuels. So we have an active burn plan written for this patch right here, all the way up to here. And we were hoping to burn it this year, but the city didn't have the budget for the overtime. We didn't get the opportunity. But if you look at where the fire burned, started here, took off up the hill, freak of nature chance of whatever. If we would have burned this all this spring, killed the star thistle, made it black, this fire here, this asshole whose car started the fire, it would have gone, and no one would ever have heard of it. They would have heard that some guy started a little fire in the park, and maybe we would have said that it ran into prescribed fire. But it wouldn't have gone to the frickin' moon. So it's not all it's about treating a million acres, it's about treating the 1,000 acres that are in the best spot. Okay, now we're talking about cloud seeding and everything over here. Drum Yogi, who's this person? Drum Yogi's losing their comment privileges, if I can figure it out. Hey Ryan, can you just go through and like turn off some of the oddball shit? Okay, people. That's all. Pray for stable weather. Think good thoughts for the ops folks that have to make these really tough calls. Let's argue based on facts. Thank you for loving maps. I'm going to leave it on for you guys to keep the comments going a little, and then I'm going to step out. Leave you with this map. What's up, Buckeye?
Hang on.